A billionaire's CEO died. His replacement seemed perfect. But when he overheard one phone call, he realized everything could be destroyed. So he did something insane. He became a cleaner in his own company. He was a self-made billionaire. Not born into wealth, not lucky with a single invention, but someone who had spent decades building a global enterprise from the ground up. His company didn't just make money. It employed thousands of people. It shaped industries. It mattered. And the culture inside it, the people who led it, the values embedded in its DNA, all of that had come directly from him. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. The call came during a board meeting. His longtime CEO, the visionary who had been with him for nearly 20 years, the person he trusted more than almost anyone, had collapsed. Not metaphorically, literally collapsed during a presentation to shareholders. A stroke, they said. Massive. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already too late. By the time the board chairman called our protagonist, it was already over. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of contemplation, but the sharp, suffocating quiet of sudden crisis. The CEO was gone. The company was leaderless. In corporate America, nature abhors a vacuum for approximately 4 seconds before someone starts positioning themselves to fill it. And that's when it happened. That's when he saw it clearly. The scramble. The suddenly intense eye contact between board members. The quick whispered conversations in corners. The way ambitious executives started appearing in hallways where they never appeared before. It was beautiful, in a terrible way, watching a pack of wolves realize there was no alpha in the room anymore. The board wasted no time. Within 24 hours, they had a solution. They would appoint an acting CEO. Someone from within. Someone who had been waiting in the wings. Someone who everybody seemed to agree was the obvious choice. His name was Richard. Smooth. Connected. The kind of executive who remembered everyone's children's names and brought the right wine to dinner parties. The billionaire had met with Richard exactly 3 times. He seemed fine, competent, ambitious in the right way, or so everyone said. But here's where the story shifts. That night, unable to sleep, our protagonist found himself walking the corridors of his company's headquarters. The building was empty at 2 a.m. except for a few late-night cleaning crew members and security guards. He took the private elevator down to the executive floor, the floor where only he and the senior leadership typically worked. And that's when he saw it. Richard's office door was open. Richard was inside on a private call, pacing back and forth. Our protagonist stayed hidden in the shadows of the hallway, listening. "No, listen to me," Richard was saying, his voice sharp, the Polish completely gone. "I'm telling you, the old guard here is soft. They made money, sure, but they never had real teeth, never made the hard calls. But I'm different. Once I consolidate power, and that will be within 6 months, I'm telling you, I'm going to restructure the entire leadership, double my stake, remove the dead weight, and by this time next year, we'll be running a completely different operation." A pause. Richard laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. "The owner won't even recognize his own company. But that's the point. The point is growth, real growth. Not this feel-good, we care about our employees nonsense that's been holding us back. That era is over." The billionaire stepped back into the darkness of the hallway. His chest felt tight. This wasn't just ambition. This was a man describing the dismantling of something sacred. This was someone planning to strip mine the company he had spent half his life building, extract maximum value for himself, and leave nothing but wreckage behind. And the board had no idea. Because Richard wasn't stupid. Richard knew how to smile in meetings. Richard knew how to speak the language of leadership and vision and transformation. The billionaire knew then that he was facing an impossible problem. If he removed Richard immediately and installed someone else, he'd face mutiny from the board. They had already committed publicly to this decision. His interference would look erratic, untrustworthy, like he couldn't let go. The media would spin it as an aging founder unable to accept that the company had moved beyond him. But if he let Richard stay, if he actually promoted him to permanent CEO, then everything he heard in that office would become reality. The company would be consumed from the inside out by someone wearing a mask of competence. So what could he do? How could he know who was genuinely worthy? How could he pierce through the performance that everyone maintained when they knew the boss was watching? He couldn't. Not through normal channels. Not through interviews or evaluations or background checks. But he could do something insane. That night, in his penthouse office overlooking the city, he made a decision that would either prove he was a genius or prove he was completely unhinged. Maybe both. He would go undercover. Not as an executive consultant or a new board member or some investor coming to audit operations. He would become the one person nobody pays attention to. The one person nobody bothers to impress. The one person who is completely invisible in the corporate hierarchy. He would become a cleaner. Think about it for a second. In what environment do people reveal their true selves more completely than when they're around someone they consider beneath them? When they're around someone they don't think matters? When they're around someone who can't advance their career, can't hire them, can't fire them, and can't offer them anything? They're completely themselves. No performance, no mask, just pure, unfiltered human nature. He spent that night planning. He researched the cleaning contractor his company used. He found out their schedule, their routes, their protocols. He organized a subcontractor transfer. It would be simple enough to insert himself into the system without anyone knowing. He arranged for his closest associate, the only person he told, to handle his responsibilities while he was gone. Then he did something nobody who knew him would ever believe. He destroyed his phone. He removed his Rolex, his diamond cufflinks, every piece of jewelry that would identify him. He stopped shaving. He bought a used security truck from a contractor he found online. He purchased a genuine uniform from a uniform supply company. Nothing too nice, just standard issue. He bought a mop and bucket, worn but functional. He was eliminating every trace of himself. He was stepping out of the identity he had spent 30 years building and becoming someone else. Someone expendable. Someone invisible. Someone who cleaned toilets and mopped floors while powerful people walked past without seeing him. The night before he was supposed to start, he sat in his apartment. Not the penthouse, just a small place he rented under an assumed name in a nondescript neighborhood, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Real fear. Not the calculated risk of a business decision, not the strategic worry of a competitive market, but genuine, visceral, existential fear. What if he was wrong? What if nobody in his company was worth saving? What if he spent 2 weeks watching his people and everyone, every single person, revealed themselves to be fundamentally hollow? What then? He didn't have an answer, so he set his alarm, laid out his uniform, and tried to sleep. The next morning, as dawn broke over the city, a man in worn overalls and a faded cap pushed a cleaning cart through the service entrance of his own company. He moved through the loading dock where the delivery trucks arrived. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody asked for ID. Nobody seemed to see him at all. He was a billionaire who had become a ghost in his own palace. But he had no idea what he was about to discover about the people he trusted most, or what one single act of basic human kindness would teach him about the true nature of leadership. The question that haunts every powerful person: if you removed your position, your money, and your influence, would anyone still respect you? And if not, what does that say about the people you've surrounded yourself with? But what he saw in those first 48 hours would make him question everything he believed about his own company. And by day 7, he would realize that the rot ran deeper than he ever imagined. The service entrance, 6:47 a.m. The fluorescent lights in the basement corridor hummed with the kind of soulless monotony that only corporate buildings achieve. He pushed his cart through with practiced indifference, moving like someone who had done this 1,000 times before, someone nobody would ever think twice about. His heart was hammering. Every rational part of his brain was screaming that this was absurd. He was a billionaire. He should be in the executive suite reviewing quarterly reports, not cleaning bathrooms. But he silenced that voice. He had spent 30 years reading people across boardroom tables. He knew how to control his face, how to disappear. The first 3 hours passed in a strange blur of normalcy. He cleaned conference rooms, he emptied wastebaskets, he mopped hallways while executives hurried past, their eyes fixed forward, their minds already deep in the day ahead. Nobody saw him. Nobody spoke to him. He was exactly as invisible as he needed to be. Then, around 9 a.m., he wheeled his cart toward the executive floor. Richard's office suite was at the end of the hallway, the corner office with the view of the entire city. He had stood in that office hundreds of times. He knew every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every detail of the space he had designed to project power and vision. Richard was already there. He was standing in the hallway with his new assistant, and the billionaire watched from behind his cart as the acting CEO's demeanor shifted instantly when an employee passed him. The smile turned on like a light switch. Warm, approachable, concerned. "Good morning," Richard called out to a nervous-looking junior analyst walking toward the elevator. "How's the Henderson project going?" The analyst stopped, surprised to be noticed. "Oh, it's going well. We're tracking ahead of schedule, actually." Richard's smile widened. He reached out and touched the analyst's shoulder. "Fantastic. You know, when I'm CEO, people like you are exactly who I want leading initiatives. Keep crushing it." The analyst practically floated away, beaming. But the moment the elevator doors closed, Richard's face changed. He turned to his assistant, and the warmth evaporated like morning dew. "Get me the Henderson file," he said coldly. "If it's ahead of schedule, that means they cut corners. Nobody works faster without cutting corners. I want to know exactly what's being compromised so I can use it in the restructuring." He walked into his office and slammed the door. The billionaire stood motionless, pushing his cart slowly down the hallway. Something dark had just crystallized in his mind. This wasn't just performance. It was calculated manipulation. Richard wasn't a natural leader wearing an uncomfortable mask. He was a predator wearing a human face. The days that followed revealed a pattern so disturbing that the billionaire began to wonder if he had been blind his entire life. Because Richard didn't just misbehave when he thought nobody important was watching. He actively created a culture of performance and fear around him. By day 3, the entire executive floor had transformed. Meetings that used to be collaborative became competitive. People who had worked together for years suddenly stopped making eye contact in hallways. A senior marketing director who had always been respected began attending meetings with a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. Why? Because Richard had mentioned once that he was evaluating every department's strategic value. Strategic value. Corporate speak for, "You might not survive the restructuring." The billionaire watched it all happen, and he realized with a sinking certainty that he wasn't just observing Richard's corruption. He was watching corruption spread like a virus through his entire organization. Because here's what most people don't understand about toxic leadership. It doesn't just affect the people at the top. It cascades down. It mutates everyone it touches. On day 4, he was cleaning the break room when 3 mid-level managers came in during their lunch hour. They didn't notice him in the corner wiping down the refrigerator. They were too focused on their conversation. "Did you hear about Patterson getting reassigned?" one of them said. "Yeah, Richard's new reorganization. Apparently, he asked Patterson why the Q2 numbers were down, and Patterson gave a straight answer. The market shifted, we adapted, but profits are still up 10%. And Richard basically told him that attitude was why he'd never go higher." So he's punishing him for being honest. That's the thing. Richard doesn't want honesty. He wants agreement. He wants people who are ambitious enough to not question him. The billionaire felt something twist inside his chest. This was his company. These were his people. And in just 3 days, Richard had created an environment where the price of safety was silence. But it got worse. On day 5, Richard made a decision that crossed from toxic into actively criminal. The billionaire was cleaning Richard's office, early morning when nobody was around, and he found a document left on the desk. A memo about redirecting funds from the Sustainability Initiative into Richard's Executive Discretionary Fund. An initiative the billionaire had fought for personally. An initiative that was supposed to fund green energy projects for the company's operations. He took photos of it with a disposable camera he had hidden in his uniform pocket. His proof. His evidence. That evening, as he was emptying the trash bins, he overheard Richard on the phone again. This time in the hallway outside his office, the acting CEO didn't even bother to go inside. "I'm telling you, this is the perfect time. The owner is grief-stricken. The board is distracted. I have maybe 6 to 8 weeks before the real CEO decision gets made permanent. In that time, I can move enough assets around, shift enough power structures, make enough allies on the board that when they vote, they won't have any choice but to keep me. Because by then, I'll have made myself indispensable." A pause. "No, I'm not worried about the old man finding out. He's soft. Even if he somehow discovered what I was doing, what's he going to do? Remove me? Admit he made a bad decision? He'll negotiate. Guys like him always do." The billionaire stood in the shadows, holding a garbage bag in each hand, and he felt something break inside him. The contempt in Richard's voice wasn't just directed at him. It was directed at the entire foundation of the company, the values, the culture, the legacy. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because while the billionaire was drowning in this realization, something else was happening on the other side of the company. Something small. Something that barely registered at first. Something that would eventually become the only light in an ocean of darkness. On day 6, in the break room at lunchtime, the billionaire was sitting alone in the corner, eating the sandwich he had packed that morning. He hadn't bothered to socialize with anyone. Why would he? He was the cleaner. He existed beneath the social hierarchy. A woman walked in, mid-30s, professional but not aggressively so. She worked in the business development department. He had seen her around the office. She seemed competent, but nothing stood out about her. Nothing that screamed ambition or ruthlessness. She opened her lunch container, took one look at her food, and then looked at him. Really looked at him. Not through him. At him. "You okay?" she asked. He froze. Nobody asked the cleaner if he was okay. "I'm fine," he said. "You sure? You've been sitting in the corner for 3 days. Every day, same spot, same sad sandwich. I'm Sarah, by the way." She didn't wait for him to respond. She just sat down at the table across from him. And then she did something extraordinary. She opened her lunch container, which had a substantial homemade meal, clearly prepared with care, and she pushed half of it across the table to him. "I made too much. And honestly, the sandwich looks depressing. Try the pasta." He stared at her. This made no sense. This woman had nothing to gain from this. He couldn't hire her. He couldn't promote her. He couldn't offer her anything except his presence, which most people actively tried to avoid. "I appreciate it, but I'm okay," he said carefully. "I know you're okay, but you're hungry, and I made too much. That's not charity. That's just not wasting food. So eat." He ate, and as he did, she talked. Not interrogated him, not acted like she was doing him a favor, just talked. She told him about her work, about a project she was proud of, about a mistake she had made in a proposal that Richard had thrown back at her with unnecessary cruelty. "He's not a good person," she said simply. "I can tell. There's nothing behind his eyes. Like he's playing a part, and he's so focused on the performance that he's forgotten there's supposed to be someone inside." The billionaire said nothing, but he listened, and he watched. Over the next 3 days, Sarah became his only authentic human connection inside the company. When he was in the break room, she would sit with him. She would notice when he looked tired and ask if he was sleeping okay. She would warn him on days when Richard was in a particularly foul mood. "Stay out of the executive floor this afternoon. He's angry, and he's looking for someone to take it out on." How did she know Richard was in a foul mood? She didn't. She just observed. She paid attention. She cared about the people around her, even the invisible ones. But here's what made her different from everyone else. What made her genuinely rare was that she did all of this without any expectation of return. She didn't do it because she thought the billionaire might be someone important in disguise. She did it because she was fundamentally decent, and decent people treat other people with respect, regardless of their status. By day 10, the billionaire had compiled a comprehensive picture of his company's crisis. Richard was actively corrupt, embezzling, manipulating, spreading fear. The executive team had largely become complicit, either through cowardice or through ambition. The mid-level staff was demoralized and divided, but Sarah stood apart. She wasn't trying to climb. She wasn't performing. She was just doing her job with integrity, treating people with kindness, and building genuine relationships instead of strategic alliances. And here's the question that haunted the billionaire as day 11 arrived. In an entire organization of hundreds of people, was she the only one? Had he really built something so broken that only one person possessed basic human decency? The answer was about to arrive. On day 12, he received word through his secret associate that the board had scheduled the announcement, the meeting where the new permanent CEO would be named. It would happen in 3 days. 72 hours remained. The billionaire realized then that his time was running out. He had to make a decision. He could reveal himself now, expose Richard's corruption, save his company from immediate damage, and go back to his penthouse. Or he could stay hidden for 3 more days. He could attend the final announcement in his cleaner's uniform. He could watch Richard's face when the truth came out. He could make sure everyone in the company understood exactly what character actually meant. He stayed. Those final 3 days passed in an agonizing blur of tension. Richard grew bolder, more confident. He was planning his first moves as permanent CEO. He was already drafting emails about restructuring initiatives. He was already calculating how many people he could replace with loyal followers. Sarah, sensing something was coming, became more protective. She warned the billionaire to stay away from a major company announcement scheduled for the morning after tomorrow. "There's going to be changes," she said. "Big ones. I can feel it." She had no idea how right she was. The billionaire watched her worry for him. A person she thought was just a cleaner. A person who had no relevance to her career or her future. And he understood something fundamental that he had almost forgotten in his years of wealth and power. Real character isn't about competence or credentials or strategic thinking. Real character is about how you treat people when it costs you nothing, when there's absolutely no benefit to being kind, when your status is beneath theirs and they could never help you climb. Sarah had that character. Richard didn't, and the choice he was about to make would force his entire company to confront that same truth. But first, there was one more day as a ghost in his own palace. One more day of watching Richard prepare to dismantle everything while everyone around him either cheered or cowered in silence. And one more night where the billionaire sat alone in his rented apartment and asked himself, what happens when you take off the cap? What happens when you force everyone to see what you've seen? What happens when character is finally, definitively valued over ambition? When someone treats you with kindness while expecting nothing in return, what does that reveal about their character compared to someone who is kind only when it serves their interests? But the moment he walked into that board meeting in his cleaning uniform, everything he had planned would change, and nobody in that room would ever see power the same way again. The auditorium was packed. Every employee, every manager, every board member. 237 people gathered for the announcement that would determine the company's future. The billionaire stood in the back of the room, pushing his cleaning cart, a mop handle resting against his shoulder. Nobody noticed him. They were all focused on the stage where Richard stood with his arms crossed, his posture already claiming victory. Richard was confident. Why wouldn't he be? He had made his move. He had consolidated allies on the board. He had spread fear through the organization. Everyone expected his name to be called. The board chairman approached the podium. "Today, we gathered to announce the permanent CEO of this organization," he began, his voice measured and formal. "This decision was not made lightly. We have considered many factors: experience, vision, strategic alignment. But we have also considered one thing that cannot always be quantified: character." The billionaire's hands tightened on the cart. Richard shifted his weight, still confident. He was already mentally moving into the corner office. "Before we announce the decision, we wanted to address something unusual that has come to our attention," the chairman continued. "An irregularity in certain fund transfers. An initiative regarding sustainability spending that was redirected without proper authorization. We are investigating these matters thoroughly." Richard's face flickered, just for a moment, but the billionaire saw it, the crack in the facade. "Now, there is another matter," the chairman said. "Security informed us this morning that someone would like to address the company before we make the final announcement. We granted this unusual request. So, without further delay, we would like to invite this person to the stage." The security guard who had been instructed to wait for him gave a subtle nod toward the stage. The billionaire stepped forward from the back of the room. His mop was still in his hand. His uniform was worn. His cap was pulled low. The room watched with confusion as this invisible man navigated through the crowd, through the rows of seats, toward the stage steps. Richard's face went white. The billionaire climbed the stage. He stood center, the vastly outnumbered figure in the worn uniform facing down the polished executives in their tailored suits. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Nobody understood what was happening. This didn't fit any script they had imagined. Then he reached up and removed his cap. The recognition spread through the room like electricity. Gasps. Murmurs. One board member actually stood up. Richard tried to speak, but no words came out. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. "For the past 2 weeks, the billionaire said, his voice calm and measured, carrying the weight of someone who had seen everything and decided what mattered. "I have been among you as a cleaner, not as a test, not as a publicity stunt, but because I needed to understand who you really are when you think nobody important is watching." He paused, letting that sink in. "So, let me be clear about what I have observed. Richard, you are a skilled performer. You know how to speak the language of leadership. But performance is not leadership. And I watched you spend these 2 weeks actively dismantling the culture we built. I listened to you plan restructuring designed not to strengthen this company, but to strengthen your personal position. I found evidence of fund misappropriation that my legal team is already reviewing." Richard stood motionless, his perfectly constructed world collapsing around him. "Security, please escort Mr. Richard from the building. You are terminated, effective immediately." As security moved toward Richard, the billionaire's tone shifted. It became less about condemnation and more about something deeper, a kind of profound sadness at what he had witnessed. "But this isn't just about Richard," he continued, "because in my 2 weeks here, I watched this organization reveal its true colors. I watched people who claim to embody our values become complicit in something darker. I watched ambition override integrity. I watched people choose silence over speaking up. I watched them treat someone they perceived as beneath them with disrespect." He let his gaze travel across the room. People were looking down, uncomfortable, seeing themselves reflected in his words. "I have a question for you," he said quietly. "If I had remained your boss, if I had been walking these halls in an expensive suit instead of a cleaning uniform, would you have treated that same person differently? And if so, what does that say about your character? What does that say about who you are when nobody important is watching? The silence was suffocating now. This wasn't a victory speech. This was a reckoning. However, he said, and his voice warmed, I did not come here only to condemn, because I also saw something beautiful. I saw one person who treated me with genuine kindness, not because it benefited her career, but because basic human decency required it. I saw someone who maintained her integrity, even when the culture around her was crumbling. I saw someone who looked past status and saw a person. Sarah looked up from her seat, confused. Was he talking about her? How could he know? I am naming Sarah Chen as the new chief executive officer of this organization. Sarah, would you please come to the stage? The room erupted. Shock, confusion. Some applause, tentative and uncertain. Sarah stood slowly, her face pale with astonishment, and made her way to the stage. The billionaire shook her hand. His grip was firm, but his expression was gentle. You are not being promoted because you are the most experienced, he said, speaking only to her now, though the entire room could hear. You are being promoted because in an organization where everyone chose performance over authenticity, you chose to be real. In a world where people climbed over each other for status, you chose to treat someone you believed was beneath you with respect. That is not something you can teach in a business school. That is something you are born with. That is character. He turned back to face the room. To everyone else here, I want you to understand something. I have built this company into a billion-dollar enterprise, but that means nothing if the people inside it are hollow. What happens next is up to Sarah, and I am confident that under her leadership, this organization will rediscover what it means to have values beyond quarterly earnings. He stepped back from the podium. The board chairman was called to make closing remarks, but everyone's attention remained fixed on Sarah, who stood at the center of the stage, still processing the reality of what had just happened. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, the billionaire found himself face to face with Sarah in the hallway outside the auditorium. She was still in shock. I don't understand, she said. How did you know Because I was paying attention, he said simply. In a room full of people desperately trying to be impressive, you were the only one just trying to be kind. Do you know how rare that is? Do you understand how valuable that makes you? I'm not ready for this, she whispered. I don't have the experience. I don't have... You have everything that matters, he interrupted gently. And I'm not asking you to lead like me. Don't come into that office trying to be a billionaire CEO. Come in being yourself. Be fair. Be authentic. Treat people the way you treated that cleaner. Build a culture where character actually means something. The rest will follow. Sarah nodded slowly, something crystallizing in her expression. Not confidence, she wasn't suddenly transformed into a seasoned executive, but clarity, understanding, purpose. The billionaire stepped back. He was no longer her boss. He was no longer anyone's boss. He was simply a man who had learned something fundamental about his own company and was now trusting someone else to lead it. As he left the building that day, this time through the front entrance, his identity restored but his perspective forever changed. He realized something that no amount of business school or MBA program could have taught him. Real power isn't about controlling people. It's about recognizing people. It's about seeing someone's character before they see it in themselves and believing in them when the entire world is telling them they're not ready. Sarah walked into the corner office for the first time as CEO. She didn't immediately change everything. She didn't make sweeping moves or fire half the staff. Instead, she did something far more radical. She went to the break room at lunch and sat down with junior employees. She listened. She asked questions. She treated everyone, from the interns to the senior directors, like their thoughts actually mattered. The culture shifted, slowly at first, then noticeably. People began speaking up in meetings again. Collaboration replaced competition. The company didn't become a perfect place, no organization ever is, but it became a place where character actually counted for something. And the billionaire? He watched from a distance, no longer involved in day-to-day operations, but present enough to see the transformation he had set in motion. But here's the question that should haunt you as much as it haunted him. If someone removed your title, your money, your influence tomorrow, would anyone still respect you? Would people treat you with kindness? Or would they finally see who you really are? That's the real measure of character. Not what you have, but who you are. If this story challenged you, if it made you think about the difference between performance and authenticity in your own life, then you need to hear more stories like this. Stories about people who had everything and discovered that the only thing that actually mattered was character. Stories that will make you reconsider what success really means. Subscribe to this channel, because every single week we bring you stories about billionaires who learned that money doesn't buy meaning, ambition doesn't buy integrity, and power means nothing if you're not the kind of person worth following. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us who in your life has shown you real character when it costs them nothing, because those are the people who deserve to be celebrated. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.